because it's natural for us to self-persevere. Okay? It's natural to want to live. Nobody wants to be tortured, friends. Nobody wants to be stabbed. Nobody wants people to cut off their hand. Nobody wants that. That's horrible. Yet, that's what they were facing in Ephesus and in a lot of these churches. You're going to really see some horrible stuff. All right. Then he says, hey, so we got works, we got labor, we have patience. Now he says, hey, you have resistance. You cannot bear, you can't stand how much you hate sin and the behavior of sinners against God's holiness. Now, this is sin in your own life, but mostly here he's talking about not putting up with people who simply oppose God. And that's what was happening in Ephesus. Remember, Ephesus was a mega center for false religion. And you've seen it in the book of Acts, where anytime you come against their religion, they started and they wanted to kill people and put people in jail for that. So we build up resistance. Then he says you test to refine, to determine if what is presented is true. Now, who were they testing? Were they testing sinners? No, they weren't testing those sinners. They were testing false prophets? No, false apostles. There were a bunch of people coming to Ephesus because Christianity was the strongest in that location. And the gospel went out to the rest of Asia Minor through the people. It was led by the people, the church at Ephesus. Everybody knew that. So these false apostles started coming in after the death of Paul. Remember, this is 40 to 45 years later, after the church was born. All right? Not 45 years after Paul was there. No, Paul stayed there another 20 years. So let's just say 20 years after Paul was murdered or martyred by Nero over in Rome. So this is what was happening. After Paul and Timothy and those folks left, John got arrested and they started having these ravenous wolves that we read about over in the book of Acts coming into the church. And many of them were sitting there claiming to be apostles. And the Bible makes it absolutely clear on the criteria for being an apostle. And guess what, folks? Nobody meets that criteria today. And none of the people that was coming up to them in that day met that criteria. That's how they knew they were false. Did they know they were false because they didn't do miracles? No, man. No, because most of them didn't do miracles. And they did very few miracles as compared to others. So what does that have to do with it? Nothing. It was the doctrine, friends. The doctrine and what God gave them concerning the apostles.